Hi, my name is Tim Ravel. I'm a biology professor at Mount San Antonio College, and this is my colleague. I'm going to let him introduce himself.
Hello, my name is Craig Petersen. I teach here in the biology department at Mount San Antonio College. Maybe you can hear the bells in the background.
Yeah, maybe so.
And I've been teaching here for numbers of decades and teach environmental biology, Bio 6, and also human sexuality, Bio 15. And have the pleasure of working with this fine young gentleman, Dr. Tim Ravel.
Okay, before we go further, a bit of history. So here we have the world famous Mr. Craig Petersen, also known as Professor Petersen, also known as the Bearded Weirdo. Mr. Petersen became the Wildlife Sanctuary Director in 1981. But to fully appreciate the sanctuary and its history, we need to go back in time. And we need to go all the way back to about 1965. In 1965, Paul Shattle on the right and Dr. Oscar Edinger on the left, president of Mount SAC, are seen in this picture looking over the site that will be designated as the Wildlife Sanctuary in the future. The college invests $38,000 for the development of the new sanctuary, and Dr. Edinger is a strong supporter of the sanctuary. But he recalls in this article that some taxpayers thought the land should be leased to an oil company for maybe a service station. But the trustees sided with the president and the biology department, and at this time over 70 species of birds are found in the area at this time. This is a tremendous investment and commitment by the college. $38,000 in 1965 is equivalent to about $320,000 in 2020, given a standard inflation rate. Wildlife observed at this time include cottontail rabbits, coyote, fox, possums, weasels, various field mice, red-winged blackbirds, common moor-hen, Wilson snipe, and even the rare grosbeak. The San Gabriel Valley Tribune shows the original plan for the 18-acre sanctuary that will border Grand and Temple. At that time, College Way is one of the original entrances into the college on the southern border prior to Grand Avenue running through the city of Walnut. The plan shows the pond and the lake, but the area listed as marshes would later become the current swamp as we know it now. Although the article states the original sanctuary is 18 acres, most documents suggest it originally started as 10 acres. Shortly after opening the wildlife sanctuary, a director was hired, Bill Hawkins, who was the director from 1965 to 1980. Here there is a sign near the original amphitheater dedicated to the directors of the sanctuary. And almost immediately after that, Bill Hawkins begins giving tours of the sanctuary to students and community members. In December of 1967, the first tour guides are officially hired. The original tour guides included Pam Goodman, Kathy Frett, Sandra Stout, Pat Gatton, and John Reiger. This picture shows the group with Bill Hawkins in 1968. The Mount San Antonio College Wildlife Sanctuary has a long history of tour guides. Here are Diana Frett and Steve Sargretto in 1972, and Claudia Dar giving a tour that was featured in the San Gabriel Valley Tribune in 1974. On June 6, 1978, Prop 13 was passed in California. This resulted in a massive decrease in property taxes, which was a tremendous benefit to homeowners, but not so good for the wildlife sanctuary. Prop 13 led to cuts in funding in many areas, including the wildlife sanctuary. At that time, between 6,000 and 7,000 people were estimated to be touring the sanctuary per year. The funding changes resulted in a loss of tour guides, and Bill Hawkins stated, people should be able to see animals and plant life in its natural environment without charge. Hawkins ultimately quits the position of Wildlife Sanctuary Director in 1980. Enter Craig Petersen. Professor Craig Petersen was hired as a part-time instructor on February 12, 1977. He was hired full-time in 78. He essentially left in 79 due to budget cuts, was rehired part-time, and then full-time again in 1981. Craig Petersen officially volunteers as the new Wildlife Sanctuary Director in 1981 without pay. Here's Craig leading a field trip back in 1984. Here's Craig in 1985. And in 1990, Craig Petersen wins the Mount SAC Distinguished Faculty Award. And a bunch of other events occur over 30 years to get us to the point today in 2020. And I'm sure we will learn about some of those along the way. In his almost 40 years of being the Wildlife Sanctuary Director, Mr. Petersen has probably given this tour to over 20,000 students. And we estimate that close to 700,000 or 800,000 people have probably visited the Wildlife Sanctuary since it opened in 1965, including students and people from the community. I had the privilege of Mr. Petersen giving me my first sanctuary tour 21 years ago, starting in this exact spot. He gives a maximum enthusiasm tour, so brace yourself. On today's tour, we'll enter Gate 3, visit the peninsula, and visit the swamp. All right, take it over, Mr. Petersen.
Hello, welcome to the Wildlife Sanctuary. We're at gate number 3, which is located at the corner of Temple and Mount Sac Way. We're gonna go in. Come on, let's go.
There we go. Okay, perfect. All right, here we go.
Hey, I wanted to explain to you my raspy sounding voice. Turns out that I've had a couple of events of cancer of the vocal cords. Little lesson to you. First thing the doctor said when I was diagnosed because of hoarseness he says, Craig, you have cancer of the vocal cords. First thing he asked was, how long have you been smoking cigarettes? And it's like, oh man, it finally catches up to you. But I had to tell him, never. I've never been a smoker, although both my parents were, probably caused by secondhand smoke. I've had 2 bouts of cancer of the vocal cord, and the most recent one happened back in 2008, and that's when they took the vocal cords and removed 1/3 of them. So I'm left with this raspy voice. It sounds like I've been out yelling and screaming for my favorite team, go team, or something. But this is the voice, and I just want to let you know I was not passing on COVID-19 to you, zooming it to you, if you know what I mean. We're now standing in the area of the lake. We've got 3 main bodies of water, the lake, swamp, and the pond. The lake is our largest one, and going through the center of the lake area is a peninsula. And the lake is shaped like a giant boot, okay, a giant sort of boot shape, big, almost like a J shape. And in this corner of the J portion is the peninsula. It's where I am now. I've got to show you an interesting plant. I'd mentioned that our bodies of water have emergent aquatics, either cattail or bulrush. Behind me in the shadows is the bulrush. I'm going to try to get one here, do a little habitat manipulation. If I was to go way deep, I could pull one of these out. Now, I'm 6 feet tall. This is probably like 9 feet tall. They get as tall as about 16 feet. This little thing is triangular shape, and they could make all types of implements and all types of things that they needed to live out of this. One of the things we've done in the sanctuary, like the natives did, you would take a bundle, and this is bulrush. You would take 25 or 30 of these, bundle them together, and you'd make like a long, almost like a hot dog shaped bundle. And then you'd make another bundle, and you'd put about 10 or 15 bundles together, put them together, and the damnedest thing happens, it makes a canoe. And so it turns out that the Native Americans could make what we would call a tule, T-U-L-E, a tule canoe. So they would do that. Also, their homes, a lot of times I'll ask students, well, the Native Americans obviously didn't live in apartments or houses. What did they live in? And inevitably, somebody says, oh, teepees. Well, good guess, but teepees were not present in the western United States like California, because a teepee is made out of giant hides of buffalo. There are no buffalo in California traditionally, and so what happens, this is what they would make their house out of, and it was called a key. And they would take willow plants, which have very flexible branches, to make a frame, and then they would take this and they would bend it, put it on the willow frame, and they would put hundreds of those all around in a circle. And it would make almost like a shingle situation, and the next one up shingle. So they would actually make their homes. We think their homes were called a key. I don't know how you spell it, it's like K-H-E-E. And so they'd make their homes, they'd make their boats. But also, what would happen is that they could make rope out of this, or fiber. They could make sandals. Who knows what they'd use it for. And so what they would do is get a whole bunch of the Native Americans, the Indians, together, and they would all practice something that I call, well, you all know what rock and roll is. Well, this is called crush and roll. And so crush and roll is where everybody would have their hands. There'd be a bunch of them. And I need a bunch of Indians with me, but I'm all by myself here in the sanctuary. So, well, I'll try it myself. So I start crushing it. And you crush it. And so this is not rock and roll, but crush and roll. And if you got a lot of Indians, a lot of people, this really helps a lot. And so what happens, it goes much quicker. But I'm breaking the fibers of this plant. I forgot the name of this plant, damn. It's something like, oh yeah, it's bulrush. And so as you break it into fibers, you can start separating. Oh my goodness, I hear the police sirens in the background. They're obviously coming to get me. Maybe you can hear that. I gotta hurry. But look at this fibers. Fibers, really great fibers. And what would happen, they could take those fibers and then they could weave them. You know, some of you might have some hair weaves or some braids. And so they would take this and over, under, and ultimately make a braid. And I could do a quickie braid like this, and this is what it would look like, this piece of rope. And so what would happen, you would try to break it, and it's like, it's pretty strong. Of course, if you take any one strand, you can break it just real easily and just break them apart. But when it's together, it makes quite a good fiber. They had so many things they could make out of this. So that's one of the plants here. I can see I'm surrounded by other plants here, such as this one here. This is a baby. Oh my goodness. This is a baby cottonwood tree. Native plant, of course, occurs here in our local environment. And the cottonwood is actually related to a plant that you'd find in the Rocky Mountains, like the quaking aspen. And what happens when there is a bit of a wind, the leaves will flutter, and where the tree next to it would not be fluttering. So if there was a wind right now, these would be fluttering a little bit, and these would not be. And you say, well, what's that all about? Well, we think it's to prevent them from overheating in the sun, because they've got such a large leaf blade. But if I take off one of the leaves, if you know anything about leaf anatomy, and I'm not a botanist, is that you've got the blade, but you also have the stick part, what they call the petiole. And it turns out that if you grab the petiole at the end, I can just, look how it twists. Oh, twisty, twisty. I can roll it in my hand. But watch when I move my fingers up towards the blade. It does not roll because the petiole is flattened at the top, and this allows it to do a bit of a twist and wiggle here. And so cottonwood has this unique adaptation to maybe, shade itself a little bit or reduce the amount of sun. We're standing on the Swamp Bridge here in the Wildlife Sanctuary, and this Swamp Bridge looks different from what it originally looked like. It was originally one narrow bridge, and it had to be torn down. I had the privilege of tearing it down due to a toxic spill that occurred in the Wildlife Sanctuary back in the early 90s, about 92. And so, swamp, we got open water. Behind me I've got cattails, which are great habitat for red-winged blackbirds. They're an emergent aquatic plant. And, but let me tell you the story. Once upon a time, when the bridge was narrow all the way down here, I was coming from an aerobics class over at the gym and had avoided this particular corner that we're near, Temple and Grand, because of major construction going on with water pipes. And part of the project was City of West Covina was putting a large water line down Amar, collecting or connecting to this particular water system. And I happened to come by on a Saturday and noticed a young man, a young contractor, that had a full-size fire hose. The fire hose was coming out of the ground and into the curb, and there was water away from the curb, like 6 or 8 feet, and water going into the storm drain. And so I stopped and asked the young man who was standing right by our signage for the Wildlife Sanctuary, and I said, "Well, what you doing?" He says, "Oh, we're cleaning out a pipeline here. We've got to clean it out." And I smelled the water. I said, "This smells really heavily chlorinated." He said, "Oh, that's nothing. This was a Saturday." He says, "You should have been here Wednesday when we started. It was really eye-watering." And I said, "This water, do you know where it's going?" He says, "Yeah, it's going down about 80 feet down here and going into a storm drain. Then it goes away." I said, "No, it goes in the storm drain and it goes in to the Mount Sac Wildlife Sanctuary." And this kid, talking about situational awareness, he says, "What sanctuary?" Standing right by the sign, had been working there for days. So I told him to shut it down. I don't think he did. I ran around and came jogging into this very area. And before I got within 80 feet of it, my eyes were watering from the smell of chlorine. And I got to this point, again, the bridge was quite narrow, and I looked in the water and it was completely still. Normally the water has all types of creatures, moving, the mosquito fish, breaking the surface tension, etc. And sure enough, everything had been killed. And I saw some catfish, mosquito fish were dead, turtles were dead. Very quiet, very eerie. I notified security. Ultimately, security came, and ultimately the deans came, and we shut the guy down. And so the young kid, he didn't know what he's doing, just shut the water off. And so I came in and showed Larry Redinger, who was our division dean at the time, and he could see the death and the quietness of the swamp due to this chemical contamination. So Larry asked me, he says, "Well, where else is water going to?" I said, "Well, it overflows into the lake." We had contamination in the lake. And he says, "What about the pond?" I said, "No, the pond is completely isolated. But the stream, it's overflowing into the stream and causing problems there." So immediately, what we did, we ran and grabbed more fire hoses from the fire science department here on campus, hooked it to a fire hydrant with potable drinking water, And we started flushing the water out of here, but it was too late. Everything was dead. Kind of going to the old adage, the solution to pollution is dilution, which doesn't make much sense because we're just pushing the toxins someplace else in a diluted form. Anyway, turned out Larry Redinger said, well, what about upstream? Was upstream contaminated? I said, no, just where it went through the pipe into the lower part of the stream. He says, let's go check it. Okay, Larry, I know how the water flows through it. We went to the upper stream, and the upper stream was chlorinated, highly chlorinated. We could smell it. Oh my God, we got a major chlorine disaster going on here. Went out, notified authorities. Turned out the kid that was dumping the chlorinated water at Temple and Grand picked up his stuff, went across the street to the gas station area, hooked up another pipe, and started dumping it there, which dumped it immediately into the stream. So now we had a stream wiped out for sure, and a swamp wiped out for sure, and part of a lake. And so one of my colleagues, Karen Kakiba Russell, and I were charged by the campus, figure out how to rebuild this stream. We didn't know how to rebuild the stream. Figure out how to rebuild the swamp. That's even worse. How are we going to do that? So we put together a program and an idea and had to rent equipment and stuff and figure out what it's going to cost. It's going to cost over $50,000 to put this back together again. And so we went to the city council, West Covina City Council, Larry Redinger, Karen Kakiba Russell, and Craig Petersen, and we pleaded our case to the city. And they said, you want $52,000 for this cleanup? I said, yes. And then you're going to come back after more money? No, that's what we need. Where do we sign the check? What a lesson to me. We should have asked for $500,000 or $5 million or whatever, because no way you can clean something up like this. So with the $52,000, the biology faculty, volunteers, students, and faculty alike, we spent the next 8 months rehabilitating the swamp area. And ultimately, years later, the swamp has come back, and it was the president of the college, Dr. Peterson, at the time, said that, Craig, sometimes in life, people give you lemons. He says, but you got to take the lemons and turn them into lemonade. And he says, oh, that's what you've done. You've rebuilt this habitat. Of course, I was still very young at that time. We rebuilt the habitat and gave lots of students and faculty experiences on how to rehabilitate a damaged ecosystem. And so that's the short story of the chlorine spill of the early 90s in the wildlife sanctuary.